But there is one place where Malcolm Turnbull will always be a hero for all of this: in the publicly funded, ideologically green left public broadcasters, even in Britain.
Australia's former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has been talking to the BBC about his successor's response to the bushfire crisis. Bear in mind, there's a little history here. Malcolm Turnbull was ousted by the Liberal Party in 2018 in a bitter row over emissions targets.
Well, no, there was no disagreement about emissions targets, actually. The BBC got that wrong. Turnbull and Morrison agreed on the targets. Turnbull actually supported and stuck to the very same targets that Australia is signed up to right now. But the BBC is less interested in such facts than in tackling its ideological enemies, such as this program.
Despite all that, you'll still hear this kind of stuff on Rupert Murdoch's Sky News Australia.
Our tragic bushfires this summer have been used by activists, journalists and politicians here to push their ideological barrow, to attack their party political enemies and to do great damage to Australia's international reputation. They are pushing climate policies that can and will do nothing ever to prevent horror bushfire conditions in Australia.
Well, there's probably a discussion to be had over who's doing the damage to Australia's international reputation. Anyway, where to start with Chris Kenny's analysis? Perhaps we should look to the Australian Weather Bureau, which tells us climate change is influencing the frequency and severity of dangerous bushfire conditions in Australia. Or we could listen to the hundreds of leading climate scientists who say the only way you limit climate change is to cut global emissions. And that means Australia taking part too.
Well, there they go at the BBC, arguing against climate denialism, missing the point either deliberately or because they have no idea about Australian politics and the Australian climate. First, the BBC should know Australia is already contributing to global action, is a signatory to the Paris Agreement and will meet its carbon dioxide emissions reduction target. Turnbull's target, in fact. Also, the BBC can talk all it likes about global action. It should be able to work out that a carbon price in Australia or even deeper emissions cuts in Australia, while global emissions continue to rise sharply, will do nothing to change or improve the climate in Australia or anywhere else. Is that too much for them to comprehend? And finally, for BBC types who might never have been sunburned, let alone seen or fought a bushfire, they need to understand we've had worse conditions, worse fires. So even if you could magically return our climate to pre-industrial conditions, we would still face these conditions from time to time in our fire seasons. And tragically, sometimes we would get fires in the middle of them. The BBC ought to stop campaigning and get across reality. Now, as if this stuff isn't bad enough, I want to take you back to Davos up there in the Swiss Alps, where the corporate and government virtue signallers of the world are lapping up the luxury while they laud the messages of doom and gloom coming from Greta Thunberg and the like. Imagine that. Billionaires and government leaders heading up to the snow in their private jets to be told what to do by a surly teenager. And now, as if they haven't humiliated themselves enough doing that, they've allowed themselves to be lectured on climate change by a bloke who talks to plants, fantasises about being a female sanitary product, and is hanging around in his 70s waiting to do his dream job, a purely ceremonial gig that he's entitled to purely and solely because of his birthright.
Move forward, we need nothing short of a paradigm shift, one that inspires action at revolutionary levels and pace.
Yep, that's how bizarre the climate crusaders have become. A member of the royal family, the heir to the throne, no less, openly calling for a revolution. When does it start? Count me in.